Hello, viewers. Welcome to another episode of a lecture series on mass communication and media studies. So, today we will discuss the Gandhian approach and its impact on media in the contemporary world. Now, we know that Gandhi has been termed as the man of the century, 20th century, because of his policies. Now, Gandhian approach is so important for us and especially for the contemporary world that the media houses and the political parties and the international policies, the foreign policies of each and every nation and systems of communication, they have all been influenced by the Gandhian approach. First and foremost thing that I would like to point out is Gandhi never used the electronic media. So, what was his mainstay for communication with the common people? We know that Gandhi has been one of the greatest leaders that the world has ever seen. We are not talking about his political alliance or his policies against a lot of freedom fighters, but what is important here is that Gandhi used only folk media and influenced people, mobilized the common people for a common cause of freedom from the tyrannies of the colonial power. Now, what was folk media and how did he manipulate such a huge British government and force them to reconsider the colonial structure and the colonial powers? First and foremost, he mobilized the largest number of people that the Indian history has ever seen. He participated in a lot of marches. He participated and rather he invigorated the energy. He inspired the common Indian people to participate in the political movements against the British colonizers. Electronic media was there during Gandhi's political struggles, because it was just after Second World War, and we know that there were international electronic media. There were a few interviews by Gandhi on BBC channels. You can search it over the net, but he never encouraged electronic media to use his images or his approach. He always depended on that organic touch with the common Indian people. He embarked on marches, on padyatras, on live communication with thousands and thousands of people, which is still an example throughout the world even today.
There is an indefinable, mysterious power that pervades everything. I feel it, though I do not see it. It is this unseen power which makes itself felt and yet defies all proof, because it is so unlike all that I perceive through my senses. It transcends the senses, but it is possible to reason out the existence of God to a limited extent. Even in ordinary affairs, we know that people do not know who rules or why and how he rules, and yet they know that there is a power that certainly rules. In my tour last year in Mysore, I met many poor villagers, and I found upon inquiry that they did not know who ruled Mysore. They simply said some god ruled it. If the knowledge of these poor people was so limited about their ruler, I, who am infinitely lesser in respect to God than they to their ruler, need not be surprised if I do not realize the presence of God, the King of Kings.
His impact, his policies were so strong that it had a great impact on a lot of people, on a lot of scholars even now. What was his policy? His policy was very simple. Policy was that of non-violence, that of absolute peace. That's why he came at contradictions with a lot of freedom fighters who were probably right on their own way, because they chose the paths of violence. But Gandhi never chose the path of violence. On the contrary, it was the absolute peace and based on truth. Maintaining this non-violence, you have to be patient. You have to have faith on two things: peace and truth. These were the very basis of Gandhi's approach to the entire political system of a very of a stormy decade of the 40s. What we know very less is Gandhi's approach to journalism. Now, this will be a very interesting case study for all the aspiring journalists and youngsters who are into mass communication. What was Gandhi's policies as a journalist? Now, we have a lot of things on journalistic ethics in our syllabus, but do we really follow that? Because nowadays news are bought, news are manipulated at the hands of huge corporates and leaders who just manipulate the truth, the representation of truth in terms of money. Gandhi was very different in this approach. For Gandhi, journalism or his press, he had 4 or 5 or a lot of involvement in publication of vernacular newspapers, weeklies, dailies. But one thing is undeniable, that he never approached to the commercial aspect of journalism. For him, this ethical ground of clinging on to truth might have been affected if he had any kind of commercial purpose in mind, which was the need of the hour in the 1940s and 30s, and he wanted to communicate with the Indian people in an Indian way. And that's why he is a shining name when it comes to vernacular press in the freedom fight against the British. Now, some of his weeklies and dailies, I'll just name some: Young India, Navjivan, Harijan, and one was very close to his heart. It was the Indian Opinion. Now, what was his strategies as an editor? First and foremost, newspaper was to hold the popular feeling and give shape to the popular resent. There was a kind of a connection between the readers and the newspapers. Newspapers, as we know, they are pillars of democracy. Now, if those pillars are not relatable to the common people's aspirations, then the building and the structure on which the pillars hold become very weak. The newspapers should arouse some of the key desirable sentiments and objectives. The sentiments in the freedom fight was, of course, we know, the sentiment of national feeling. The objective was to have Swaraj, to get rid of the foreign rule, and again India becoming a free country just like the other nations throughout the world. Newspapers, they do not press on the resentment of a lot of people, where you might have a lot of dissents, you might have a lot of defects. Now, we try to hide the defects of our nation, of our people, of the systems that we follow, and we think that it will give a very bad impression of our own images. But Gandhi didn't ever cared about these things. People's defects, the system's defects, the political system, the educational system, the social system, the casteist system. Gandhi became a staunch critic of all these social evils that India had. This was, if you do not have a question, if you do not have a problem, how would you look for a solution? So Gandhi pointed out these kinds of problems for which we had to take the path of non-violence. We had to take the path of peace and absolute truth. And this is a way in which his newspapers, along with his speeches, mobilized the political agenda of the common people. For the first time, Indian common people got involved in the political thought and aspirations of a nation. I will just read out a very important passage from his autobiography, My Experiments with Truth. Indian Opinion, one of his weeklies, was a part of my life. Week after week, I poured out my soul in its columns and expounded the principles and practice of Satyagraha, as I understood it. During 10 years, that is until 1914, accepting the intervals of my enforced rest in prison, there was hardly an issue of Indian opinion without an article from me. I cannot recall a word in these articles set down without thought or deliberation or word of conscious exaggeration or anything merely to please. Indeed, the journal became for me training in self-restraint and for friends a medium through which to keep in touch with my thoughts. Journalism at one point of time for Gandhi, in the era of Gandhi, was the reflection of truth. Whatever the resentment, whatever the popular demands, whatever the popular aspirations were, journalism was a platform for these common people, very unlike the newspapers and the news network we have today. Now, there is another very important aspect of Gandhi is his policies are being implemented in ICT. Now, what is ICT? ICT is Information and Communication Technology. And this technology was not there even in the 60s. It was a late culmination of advanced mode of communication when strategic communication by a lot of people were connected with technology. We get information and communication technology. One thing we should remember is that communication, whether it is in group or in mass or in electronic or virtual, it is not the technology that determines what my content and form will be. It is actually the technology which facilitates us to implement that human thought. Gandhi exactly did that. And Gandhi's policies are followed in these advanced mode of communications. Now, ICT is a strategic system that provides the very basis of global exchanges, of global and diversified expressions, almost at every level. These are from the individual to the community, from the rural areas to the urban elites, and even the panchayats. Now, Gandhi's ICT strategy lies in his nationwide travels through trains and marches on foot. Now, it will be a little curious for the viewers to know that what was Gandhi's ICT. Of course, nowadays we can understand his strategies in a better way than ever. Because Gandhi followed a kind of a technique. We should not say it's technology, because technology and techniques, they are not the same. But Gandhi's technique was very, very effective, which no media powerhouses even in the West had so. What was Gandhi's policies? Gandhi could mobilize a large number of crowd in a very active way. The first and foremost thing about Gandhi is the immediacy. Now, even in the media, we cannot implement this immediacy. Suppose we watch something in television or even in new media like World Wide Web, we do not have that impetus within us or that encouragement within us to actively participate in any kind of movement or revolution on an immediate basis. Now, during the print era, it took a long time. Even in the electronic era of dissemination of news and information, it takes at least a few days. But Gandhi, he himself, was more than any kind of media or any kind of newspaper. For the Indian common people, Gandhi's word of mouth was to be followed without any question. His effective communication resulted in three things. First and foremost, immediacy. Second, mobility. And third, activity. Immediacy comes with the concept of time. Now, in this contemporary world, in this modern world, it is very difficult for us to invest a lot of time in a lot of things. Life has become very fast. Now, for Gandhi, he never waited for something to be implemented for a long time, and he had that power throughout the nation, which could mobilize the crowd on immediate manner. Now, we have a very interesting document here, Gandhi's handwritten message after Dandi March, and this handwritten message has become a case study in ICT, because what handwritten message means is it is written by someone and without any question on authentication. Because of course, if someone writes something and and if it is a person like Gandhi, people are bound to react and people are bound to follow it on an immediate basis. Now, this kind of immediacy was very necessary in the 1940s, where non-cooperation movement, satyagraha, demand for Swaraj through Dandi March, and a lot of activities were implemented by Gandhi without any alliance of any kind of political party. Or what his communication meant for the common people was he could connect and convince the Indian people that whatever he is doing is absolutely on behalf of the common people. Now, we are not value judging here. We will find a lot of critics of Mahatma Gandhi, but his initial days were not like the days that we know in his later life. Initially, he was a barrister who came from a quite well-to-do family, and his name was Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, and he went to South Africa, and we all know the story, and there he faced the global evil of discrimination. He came back to India, his home, and he found that apart from the racial discrimination, we have this casteist discrimination. Now, when Gandhi is working as a journalist, he is running his newspapers, or he is in the crowd, mobilizing the crowd with his political comments, with his political speeches, he consciously avoided this kind of discrimination, especially in the 1930s and 40s, when the whole world was under the spell of racist discrimination, casteist discrimination. We know that India is based on our society, a traditional society is based on the Hindu traditional society, is based on casteist divisions. We have the four varnas, and those varnas still operate today. Gandhi's policies just was to contradict these traditional beliefs of casteist separation of common people. Now, you cannot have a unity in the crowd if there are seeds of discrimination within them, however traditional it is, however cultural it is. Gandhi was not a non-believer. Again, repeat that Gandhi was not a communist or a socialist. He was not a non-believer. He was a pious Hindu. That being a pious Hindu doesn't mean that you have to consider everything what is there in the Hindu tradition, the evils. Gandhi consciously started a kind of a protest, a kind of a rebellion against these kinds of discriminations, for which a lot of Hindu fundamentalist groups couldn't stand Gandhi, and it resulted in assassination of this person in 1948. And this was precisely because, irrespective of religion, caste, creed, it could be Hindu, it could be Muslim, it could be Christian, Parsi, it could be anyone, Santali, it could be Harijans, it could be Dalits, all the people united under Gandhi's leadership as the common Indian. Why Gandhi is important today? We can see that the international political and military arena is not very peaceful. We can see that India is facing a lot of questions internally and externally. We can see that the superpowers like United States is at war, a soft kind of war with another superpower called China. We know that the Russians do not have a very good relationship with the Western powers. Now, we are always on a verge of violence, on a verge of breaking out a war. We know what is happening in the Middle East, the rise of terrorism, creation of terrorism by the superpowers, the Palestine-Israel conflict, and the Kashmir conflict in India. We have conflicts everywhere. Gandhi's policies of communication, Gandhi's policies of ideological stance, those have become very important in this global world where everywhere we find wars and everywhere we find non-violence. Now, this concept of non-violence, which was perpetrated even in every sphere of his works, whether it is communicating with the crowd, whether it is journalism, whether it is his political ideology. One thing was very clear, was that this peace, this idea of peace has to be believed in. Now, you cannot run a newspaper saying that you want peace, but at the core of your heart, at the personal level, with having no reliance on peace. Now, India, we know that the tensions between India and Pakistan has risen over the issue of Kashmir. It's very interesting what Gandhi's policies would have been in these kinds of cases. Nowadays, what we have forgotten is the Gandhian policies and approaches, in spite of the fact that he has been the greatest leader in the country. Gandhian approach is implemented and conducted on both levels in the sense micro level, which is a personal level, which is an individual level, which is concerned with our personal lives, our personal beliefs, personal ideologies, and also on a macro level. By macro level, I mean the levels of community handling, the levels of system implementation in a nation or in a state, or for that matter, even in a group. Now, these policies and policy implementing of non-violence based on truth has to have a kind of a belief system to be operated. Now, if someone has to believe in the absolute truth of peace, and media to a great extent does that, but often it has the stance of maintaining peace, the stance of ethical ground of journalism sometimes is compromised on the basis of money and sponsorship and commercialization. We all have these developed countries in the West and the developing countries in the East. India is a developing country. Now, more than ever, Gandhi's policies has to be implemented here in communication and information technologies because of the fact that we need development. Development can only come through absolute peace and harmony between and among various communities. So, more than the freedom struggle, more than the requirement of a Gandhian approach during the freedom struggle against the Britishers, what the scholars think now is Gandhian approach is an absolute necessity in today's world, in India, outside India, and in all spheres of life, because life is very precious and it can only be developed with understanding each other. I hope you have a lot of questions, a lot of queries, a lot of answers, and a lot of comments to make on the Gandhian approach and its effect throughout the world and throughout the communication systems. I'm sure you'll delve into the questions and researches and case studies regarding Gandhi. It is beyond the capacity of this program to throw light on various aspects of Gandhi's approaches. But I hope with questions you have enjoyed the session. Thank you.